city of Colorado Springs. Some of the problems with sales tax, they're declining nationally. So this isn't a problem just facing Colorado Springs. It's happening with a lot of municipalities around the state and around the country. But some other endemic problems with sales tax is it's consumption-based, and we all know what's happening with consumption right now as consumers pull back. The second thing is a more long-term problem with sales tax is it's generally based on goods and not services. In 1950, 65% of purchases were made up of goods. Today, that's only 35%. We've really gone to more of a service economy, and many of those services are not taxed. So you can understand how sales tax collections might have more volatility in them over time. Another problem with it that is specific to Colorado Springs is the fact that a lot of retailers are moving outside the city limits. And I think Jan Martin calls this leakage, and it is leakage. And every time you see a big box move outside the city limits, you can probably expect that you're going to lose anywhere from $1 to $2 million of sales tax revenue. And that's been happening. You know, we have Walmarts now in Woodland Park, we have them in Fountain, we have them out in Fountain or Falcon and the like. Here's the sales tax rates for some comparative cities in Colorado, and you know, if you look at that, we're pretty much online and on target with most other large cities in the state. We're at 7.4% in total, including state sales tax. Denver is just a little bit higher, but you'll notice that Denver has a small tax for science and culture, and also they're paying off the football stadium. It's kind of a different picture when you look at property taxes. And I kind of got the idea for this slide from John Hazelhurst from the Business Journal. And I verified his numbers, and they're pretty good. And what I see in this slide is that, you know, I look at Boulder, I look at Denver, I look at Pueblo, and like, I can kind of figure out what the mill levy is going to be. I look at Colorado Springs, it's a lot more difficult, because in El Paso County, we've approved so many special districts. We now have something like, I believe it's in the magnitude of 80 special districts, and most of them have been created in the last 10 or 11 years. And they're all put together to help fund things like infrastructure as new development occurs. Well, it makes, in my mind, it makes it difficult to understand how voters are going to vote when you're in these different districts. You know, I happen to live in a district with a relatively modest mill levy, somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 to 60 mills. But there are other people that could be in an area where the mill levy is up 130 to 180 mills in total. And you have to question, how are these people going to vote on November 3rd? You know, the people in the low mill levy areas versus the higher mill levy areas. I'll also point out on the bottom that Denver has this occupational privilege tax. That's a nice word for an employer tax. And the reason I'll come back to that when we talk about Sustainable Funding Committee. One of the things that helps create some of the issues that we have today are Tabor. And we're so fortunate in Colorado Springs, we have two Tabors. I guess we're not bright enough to live under one Tabor, so I guess two Tabors are better than one. But as you all know, Tabor requires a vote of citizens for every tax increase. It limits revenue. Statewide, Denver, Boulder CPI plus population growth is used to assess how much revenue can go up. It's different, though, in the city. It's based on the CPI plus growth, but it's growth in real property values. And that alone makes it a lot more complex, in my mind, for city administrators to figure out how to budget, because they have to address both Tabors in their deliberations to see whether they're exceeding any one of the caps. And certainly a problem with Tabor is the ratchet down effect. So we're seeing an economic contraction over the last 12 to 18 months, and certainly that affects city budget. As the budget declines, then when you ratchet up, you may not be able to ratchet up to the point where you get back to levels that you once were at. A real problem that I see with the Tabor amendment is how it was constructed. You know, you look at the Denver-Boulder CPI, well, we're not in Denver and Boulder. Our costs may rise much, much differently than Denver-Boulder. Moreover, the CPI is an urban measure of urban residents. The city doesn't always buy things that I might buy. The city buys fire trucks. The city buys police vehicles. They buy all the equipment for that. They pave a lot of roads. And those costs change a lot differently than the general level of the CPI. I think we could do a lot with Tabor if we refined our measure a little bit and got a little more accurate measure of the true cost increases that happen in government, whether it's the city of Colorado Springs or the state of Colorado. Another intervening effect is the Gallagher Amendment, and I think a lot of you are probably familiar with it, but what it does is it sets the total state collections for property taxes at 45% from residential, 55% from commercial. Commercial assessment is fixed at 29%, and the degree of freedom, or what can vary, is the residential assessment. When Tabor was first implemented, the residential assessment was about at 21%. Now it's down under 8%. And what that means to individuals and commercial property owners, if you look at the bottom there, if I just looked at $100,000 worth of property value on commercial, if it's assessed at 29% rate, and if the mill levy is 52 mills, commercial property owner will pay $1,500 of property taxes per year. In contrast, residential, with the same value of $100,000, would pay only $414. If you look at the ratio then of residential to commercial, 27%, or the ratio is 27.45% residential to commercial. Again, this brings up a question of how will people vote. You know, commercial property owners who see the higher burden of the property tax might vote much differently than residential property owners. Tabor and Gallagher like to work together. During an economic contraction, property values can go down, but the mill levy can't be adjusted upward to counteract this effect without a vote. And during an economic contraction, it's a lot more difficult to get in a positive vote on these things. Further, if you have very good years and your assessments are going up, you might be inclined to close or reduce the mill levy, but that can be hazardous to the budget in future years, because once you drop the mill levy, then it requires a vote to increase it once again. Another intervening fact is Amendment 23. In 1982, 60% of K through 12 was funded by property taxes. Today it's only 40%. The rest of that had to be backfilled by the state from other revenue sources. And when you take other revenue sources out of the pool, then there's less that can go to other activities that are required, you know, whether it's roads, bridges, and other infrastructure items, community activities, and the like. So that kind of gives us a background of where we, or how we got to this. Now I want to talk a little bit about the Sustainable Funding Committee. One of the city's goals in its strategic plan is to develop and implement fiscal sustainability policies to support core services that proactively ensure the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens, attract, develop, and retain a high-performing municipal workforce, and fund internal infrastructure needs. That's a reasonable goal. And what the City Council did is they formed a group of citizens, and we called it the Sustainable Funding Committee a year ago, last August, to start looking at all the functions of the city and to help provide recommendations to the council and the city manager on what might be some long-term changes that could take place to help the city function more efficiently. And if you want to find the report, you can go out to springs.com, springsgov.com, and there's lots of information out there on the Sustainable Funding Committee, including the 300-page report, which, because of this presentation, I was forced to read. Thank you very much.